Radio 1 FM 90.
Brought to you by Housing Finance Bank, a financial institution regulated by Bank of Uganda. Housing Finance Bank, we make it easy.
Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Spectrum, live on Radio 1 FM 90. We're broadcasting from the Central Building, the home of Radio 1 FM 90, along the Stool Street here in the heart of our city, Kampala. But we're also live on our website, which is www.radio1fm90.com. On that website, there is an icon with the word Listen Live. You click on it, and you'll be getting us loud and clear. We're also live on the different radio listening apps, TuneIn, Afro Mobile, your TV channel, Radio Garden, and Stream Afrique. Those can be obtained from the Google Store of your smartphone. You download, look for Radio 1 FM 90, and as long as you have an internet connection, you'll be able to listen to us from anywhere across this globe. The other option is actually on your TV set. If you have a DSTV connection, look for audio channel 897. Two ways to contribute to this discussion. One of the ways is to call in. Time allowing, I'll open the phone lines for you to actually do so. But the best option is to send us a text message, a WhatsApp message, via the number 0703 090. I repeat the number 0703 90 0703 090 090. Tell us where you're listening from. Give us that question or comment, and the listeners will be responding to you. Today we'll be having a discussion around the state of torture in Uganda, and this is in line with the commemoration of the UN Day, support of torture victims, which will be commemorated tomorrow at a global level. The theme this year, from what we have seen, is torture-free communities for all. And of course, torture remains one of the key issues when you look at human rights situation in Uganda. Numerous reports have suggested that torture is mainly being perpetuated by state organs, including the police, the army. But we also saw a trend where actually individuals were also becoming perpetrators, calling for specific attention in that direction. In terms of the legal framework, we know we have the Prohibition of Torture Act, which actually gives individual liability to perpetrators of torture. But we still have the situation continuing with the challenge of torture in our country. So we'll be discussing what this day means, the state of torture in Uganda, what are some of the latest statistics, but also looking at the best way forward we can ensure torture-free communities, and what for all actually means in the broader sense of fighting torture. I have two guests today. Mr. Alex Kigoye, he's the head of programs at the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Kenneth. Good evening, listeners.
We also have Ms. Nancy Ayebare. She's the legal officer at the same center. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us.
All right. Let's begin by helping people to understand what torture is. There could be somebody there who does not understand what torture is, and the context we would be looking at it. I'll begin with you, Mr. Kigoye. What's torture, broadly speaking? And if you can cite examples here in Uganda, what you've been able to document as cases of torture.
Thank you so much, Kenneth, for that question. And once again, my name is Alex Kigoye, the head of programs at the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. Now, when we talk about torture, we are guided by the current law that that was enacted and passed in 2012. That's the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act of 2012. So, in that law, the definition of torture states that torture is an act that inflicts severe pain, be it psychological, be it physical, that is intentionally done by either someone in a public capacity or someone in a private capacity, but done with purposes of wanting to extract a confession, wanting to punish, wanting to intimidate, and all this, if it's done unlawfully, then this qualifies to be an act of torture. Many times we have seen incidences where suspected criminals, for example, are arrested and in the process of interrogation, wanting to get a statement, police goes on to inflict acts of severe pain. Sometimes we have seen people lined up in courts with marks of wounds, and they come out to allege that during the process of when they were into detention at police centers, at different centers that they allege that they say their act of infliction of pain was done. For example, you remember what we saw during the AIGP Kawes when there was that massive arrest of people. And actually, court came out to say that the people that were arrested then, they were tortured. And of course, it even awarded compensation to them. But of course, we shall talk about that. The challenges that we have seen, accessing compensation is one of them. We also saw incidences when Afande General Katumba also was shot at. There was also an arrest, and also people came out to say that they went to they were tortured. We also remember a famous case of Kakwenza, for example, when he was detained, and then he came out with all these marks, saying that when he was in detention, he was being forced to accept or say some things. So all of these qualify to be acts of torture. But as also put it, that torture has a lot of forms that goes beyond security operatives. So we have also seen a growing trend of torture happening, being perpetrated by people in private capacity. For example, we have seen a lot of incidences in homes, for example, where you see these stepmothers inflicting a severe pains onto children. We have just seen a recent incident that was in media in Mitiana there, where a woman went to pick some things from her home that she had left, and then the husband had to gather with a group of people, and then they started burning this woman with plastic elements. And all of this causes a severe pain, physically, psychologically. And you see, it is right there that the purpose was punish you, intimidate you, get a confession from you, extract information from you. So all of this combined, they form an act of torture. And these are things we live with them in our community, and that's why we come to talk about them. Yeah.
All right. Ms. Ayebare, let's look at the Ugandan situation, given the number of examples that he has given, Mr. Kigwea has given. When you look at the Ugandan situation, is torture increasing? Is it reducing? We have had you people from SCTV and other stakeholders, including the Uganda Human Rights Commission, raising awareness about this, training for members of the security forces, and also advocating for the implementation of the law to be able to punish the perpetrators, to send a signal to those that would want to engage in torture. So is the situation improving, or we still have challenges at hand?
Good evening, listeners. Still, my name is Nancy Ayebare, Legal Officer, ACTV, as previously introduced. And torture is definitely still there. If it wasn't, we probably would not be having these celebrations and all these activities happening. So torture is still there. According to the statistics we have right now, we would rely on the Uganda Human Rights Commission report, the most recent report it would be for 2023. Torture is still the highest reported violation among the human rights violations. In 2023, we had, and I'll get the number. It was out of the 403 complaints that were registered, torture complaints were 127. And it was the highest reported violation. Still in 2022, it was still the highest reported violation, with 277 complaints out of 770, which shows that we really still have a lot of work to do. Still in SCTV, in last year, 2023, we managed to receive allegations from 1,053
1,053.
Yes, survivors. Now, those specifically were allegations against private individuals, something that Mr. Chigwe has talked about, that there is a rising, like a spike in allegations against private individuals, which was not there before. Initially, we used to think there were security agencies perpetrating torture, but now it has a bit shifted to increase much in private individuals.
Explain a little bit on private individuals. How does it happen?
Private individuals are people who are like common people, community members.
You and I,
exactly. And that is why the law, according to the PPTA, or Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, we say anyone can torture. Before, we used to think security agencies, police, security for prisons, UPDF, whatever, all those government officials, as we would call them, they were the only perpetrators. But right now, anyone is capable of torture according to our law, and all these people can be prosecuted according to the law.
So what's the form of torture, looking at the area of private individuals? Or what kind of cases are you looking at?
I think it's really all forms. As you said, the forms of torture, it's physical, psychological, even pharmacological. Really, within the community setting, most of it is physical. But then psychological comes back now, let's say, to the families, where we find husbands, maybe, I'll use the word oppressing, but it also falls into torture now. Maybe their wives or their partners, or even vice versa, wives or women doing it against the men. Sometimes it may not really be physical, but that emotional component that happens when they are taunting you in your home, they are, saying things, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, all that can amount to psychological torture when you get into its deep ingredients.
All right.
Yeah.
So you say cases are increasing, but somebody will say, why? Why are the cases increasing? We have a law in place. We have campaigns against it. I know annually you have activities to actually tell the public and even the authorities about issues of torture. Why is it persisting?
That's a very good question, because that's also the same question we ask ourselves every time when we are providing these services and making assessments for these survivors. But then the law, it is there, yes, but its implementation, there is still a big gap in the implementation and enforcement of this law, because even if the levels, one challenge, the reporting of these cases is still limited from the community members. Most of these people who suffer from these torture incidents, it is not easy for them to report for so many reasons.
Especially at the household level.
Yes, especially because you find, let's say, I'll take an example. If I'm a wife and I'm being tortured by my husband, it will be very hard for so many reasons for me to go ahead and report my husband. Maybe if I report him and something is done, let's say he's taken away from my home now, who will take care of my children? That is one example. Another example, you will report, but then where will you get the witnesses to now support your allegations in court? Because most of these allegations, to succeed, there needs to be witnesses to support your statement in court.
The body is evidence enough. Maybe you have been beaten.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much. But now in our courts these days, or even courts everywhere, in common practice, it is not easy for you to just present your injuries. Currently, it's not easy for you to just present injuries without any supporting evidence, proper documentation for you to actually win a case of torture. It also now leads us to our current challenge that we are trying to point out of inadequate documentation and effective investigation of torture cases.
Right. Mr. Kigwe, some question to you. Why is torture persisting? What would be your view? I know your colleague has explained the issue of failure to implement the law in the manner that you expect it to be implemented. But what else?
Actually, there could be a mixture of reasons. Could be many. But majorly points out to reporting, just as Nancy has talked about it. We have a lot of ignorance within our communities, and that's why we go all along to ensure that we raise awareness onto these issues so that people come out to report actually. But the reporting is also majorly affected by fear. remember, as we have talked about torture, most of the perpetrators would say, in the current saying, the big people, or if security. So many times they carry that kind of fear. The survivors fear to come out to report. And of course, we have had incidences where people, even those that will come out to report, they experience challenges of being followed up and then maybe arrested again, intimidated again, all tortured again. So there is that fear that comes with the reporting. And that's why in one of our work that as civil society, as activists, we have come out to say it is high time we have a Witness Protection Act, a witness protection law in place, so that witnesses, survivors of torture, survivors of other human rights violations can ably come out and they are protected. They are able to give their testimonies without intimidation, without fear that fear of reprisal, fear of being tortured again. So that is one of the major challenges that we are still having. We don't have a legislation around witness protection, and there's a lot of fear when it comes to communities.
You are experts in this particular regard. You speak to the victims and survivors who actually come for you for counseling and all other aspects. Let's try to get into the minds of the main perpetrators, in this case, the security agencies. Have you been able to understand why they carry out torture?
Why?
What information have you been able to gather?
First of all, I want to say within our legal framework, locally, national and international, torture is not acceptable. So even though they have 1,000 reasons, those reasons should be wrong. And this is basically because the impact of torture really is grave. But also besides that, we have seen that the reasons for always security agencies that they give, for example, we are trying to get information, this is a murderer, then the community has rejected them, then we need to have this confession and what have you. Our law states it that people are innocent until proven guilty. So it should be your role to really find this evidence so that in a way that is non-torturous, so that you have your case and you're able to prove it in court. But of course, the discussions we have had also, they bring in the whole issue of inadequate facilitation and capacity. In terms of human resource, we don't have enough human resource to do thorough investigations for us to be able to document cases without torture. But of course, it also comes in with the other bit that they have been giving us, the whole thing about technology, being able to apply the modern methods of investigations and interrogation. So those inadequacies within the security agencies have also contributed to that. But there is also a whole mindset that our security agencies, all the personnels in the security forces, sometimes their mindset is bent towards being violent, knowing that the only way they can do this work is about torturing, is about being showing the power. I'm the one in charge, I'm the one in power. So there is that whole mindset that also we need to address as a country. But of course, it also stems from the communities, the way we have set. Where we are set as a community. We understand that we have been a violent country. So, and literature, psychology shows that someone who has been in the environment of violence, they are very likely also to be violent when they grow up. So we have had homes where we grow from. Where those security people grow from. Don't
be shy about it.
That are very violent.
You can give us your example.
We have also had a culture now to say maybe the only way to address issues is through violence. And this one actually now has transited into our communities, that you have a community that is very much charged. No room for dialogue, no room for negotiations, but the only language we know is violence. that is when now you have these words now emerging, mitima gyakaluba, things like that, so that because the kind of violence that people have experienced, it is the only way they know to negotiate, the only way they know to dialogue. It's about violence. So even these people are extracted, now they come into our forces, now that mind is all crowded within them, and then we see a series of violence. Because the thing is, I would say that the government as the state is really, I would say they are willing probably, that's why they have passed the laws in there. So we have a very good legal framework. They have ratified even the international instruments. Uganda is a signatory to the UN Convention Against Torture. We are signatories to so many, the CEDAW, the ICCPR, all of those. And then nationally we have a constitution with a whole chapter on human rights, but also specifically Article 24 and 44 that actually talk about torture and prohibit torture. And then we have a law. And then we have its regulations. And we have just passed the Human Rights Enforcement Act as well. So I would say probably the state has this will, but now the practice becomes a challenge. So the enforcement becomes the challenge at that level.
Ms. Ayebare, there has been an argument, you're a legal officer, there's been an argument that the state, when it comes to prosecuting those implicated in torture, they are not actually using the Anti-Torture Act. They are using other laws, and therefore it has rendered this law useless. Have you found that to be an important issue? Is it a fact that actually the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, which would hold individuals culpable, is actually not being utilized at the time of prosecution?
That is actually partly true, because in most cases, even when survivors try to report, you will find these cases which they try to report torture, but then they are reduced to assault. In most cases, for reasons which us now as service providers, we may not really be able to tell, especially when they are brought against, let's say, security agencies, and then you're reporting, let's say, to the police, and then they cannot now open a case of torture against their own fellow officers. But then again, now assault would be through the penal code, which now makes the PPTA lose its sense of why it was brought up. But then when you engage now the security agencies or the security officers who are meant to register these complaints, sometimes they will just tell you, this law is too harsh. Because the punishment given under this law is not more than 15 years. Which I think according to them is probably too harsh. But then I think it would be the best thing to do to perpetrators so that it is deterrent enough so that the others can see an example. And then they will see that maybe it has an impact on my life. Let me not continue to do this kind of actions even when they know they are wrong. And I think because it has not been utilized, that is why the perpetration has continued in and out. Year in, year out, we still get survivors reporting. We are getting tortured by security agents, even by private individuals, because it provides for the private individuals, but very few of these people are actually being prosecuted according to this law.
And what are you doing about that? As ICTV, are you thinking about issues like private prosecution, taking up these cases, and instead of using the penal code and actually insist on using the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act? Because we're seeing so many organizations doing prosecutions, actually, public interest litigations. We
definitely do. We also do like capacity building, trainings and engagements with communities and other victims that we get in other platforms. And maybe just for the record, survivors can be both private individuals and also even state people, even security agencies can be victims.
They can also be tortured.
But then we also encourage all people to use this act, and we do the empowerment. We teach them about the law. We teach them about the provisions of the act and its regulations, the remedies provided for under this act. When we do our awareness creations and our capacity buildings, we make sure we give all this information to all the community members and the security agencies as well.
All right, Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. Do send us your WhatsApp message using the WhatsApp number 0703 090 090. Our topic of discussion today is torture in Uganda? According to the Uganda Human Rights Commission report, the report for last year, we still have a problem when it comes to torture, because out of the 403 complaints registered, majority 127 were actually from torture victims. The SCTV, African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, also say they continue to register allegations or complaints, not only from security agencies, but even from members of the public. This year, the commemoration will be done tomorrow, and the theme is Torture-Free Communities for All. When we return, we'll look at the theme and what it means in the context of Ugandans. Are you Ugandans up and running when it comes to fighting torture? Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. We continue after this break.
Fund of Uganda. Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90.
Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum, live on Radio 1 FM 90. Topic of discussion today, we are looking at how we can deal with torture in Uganda, fighting it because it's a human rights violation. And this is in the context that tomorrow we will be commemorating the UN Day for support of torture victims, which is a calendar event. And in studio today, I have officials from the African Center for the Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, one of the entities involved in the fight against torture in this country, to have a discussion with us. Among other things, they're telling us about the state of torture in this country, and they did explain, based on the Uganda Human Rights Commission and the complaints that they continue to receive from their offices, that indeed torture continues to increase, not only from the side of duty bearers of state agencies, but also you, the private individual, in your homestead or in your community. In studio, two guests, Alex Kigoye, Head of Programs, and Nancy Ayebare, Legal Officer from SCTV. Well, gentlemen and lady, the theme tomorrow will be torture-free communities for all. Let's evaluate the response of Ugandans when it comes to issues of fighting torture, and I'll begin with you, Ms. Ayebare. Do you think Ugandans are looking at this as a critical issue and are responding to support efforts to actually fight torture? What have you been able to see, especially in this era where we have technology which is aiding the fight against human rights violations?
Thank you once again. I think Ugandans are very alert at this point. The human rights wave is all over the place in Uganda, and I think very many people are starting to appreciate what human rights are, and they are starting to speak up. In terms of technology, I think with social media, we've had so many cases being recorded actually and having been initiated from social media. One person identifies a problem or identifies a violation, and the moment they share, it's all over the place. It's quicker to identify. Police is quicker to keep track of such violations, and I think it's commendable on the part of the public. They are not leaving it to only human rights defenders or institutions or Uganda police to do this. Because now, according to the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, it still gives the duty to report to anyone. You don't have to be a survivor or a victim to actually report torture. Anyone can report torture. Where you see that there is a chance of torture happening or it is happening and you see it, you have a responsibility and a duty to report. And all these recordings that are happening, they may not be decisive in court. They will have to be verified for them to be taken as evidence. But at least if they make this alert, someone is able to get a starting point of, there is a chance that something wrong is going on here. Where do we start? And I think on that, I also want to commend the Uganda police. It has been very alert and proactive in following up some of these allegations that come from social media, not taking them for granted. And at least they've been able to do some things and got some people to account.
All right. Yeah. Mr. Kigoye, your take on this. Are communities responding, given what you have seen?
The thing is, we can't fight torture alone.
Maybe let's even begin by understanding this theme very well. Torture-free communities for all. What does it entail?
So we are looking at torture in all its sense, in wherever it is, it can happen from. It can happen in homes, for example. It can happen in schools. It can happen in offices. It can happen in security forces. So we are looking at all of us being involved in addressing issues of torture, but also us as a community to work together actually to prevent acts of torture. So that's why we are saying that our communities should be free from torture, because it's an absolute right. No person should be tortured. It's an absolute right. So as communities, we need to do something. As communities, we need to be alive to the issues of torture, because we understand the magnitude. We are the people that are tortured, or we are the people that engage into acts of torture. So all of us have a responsibility to come together to say torture should stop. Going back to the question whether the communities are responsive or are we speaking to a dead rock, I would say that as we have moved a journey, really, I would say from where we started this campaign as a nation, as civil society, there's been major progresses made. For example, when it comes to even advocating for the law, we were with people. We had different people coming together, civil society, but also the communities demanding for a torture-free communities. Now, coming to that, then it comes to the fact that a lot of things that we have achieved together as communities. For example, we have been able to train key personnel in addressing issues of torture. We have trained security organs, we have trained state prosecutors, we have trained the UPDF, and now we are calling on the communities to utilize the institutions that we have trained, because now we know they have the capacities to work on these issues.
All right.
That's why
maybe you train a few police officers or members of the UPDF. Is this training inculcated in their manuals, in their training manuals, even as they do recruitment and train the huge force, the bigger force? Do they actually pass on this training? You could be training a few officers here and there.
Exactly. Of course, as for society, we may not have all the resources. And that's why we continue now demanding the government also to have these things streamlined, because it should be their responsibility. When Uganda was reviewed by the Committee on Torture, UN Committee Against Torture, in 2022, a recommendation was given to the state to ensure that all security personnel and all other government officials who are key in fighting against torture, they are trained. So that was a recommendation, no doubt.
If there was space accorded, would you be willing as SCTV to actually go there into the training camps where they're training these soldiers or policemen to actually talk to them?
Exactly. And we have had those engagements.
Have you?
We have actually taken on trainings within the training schools. We have worked with the Directorate of Human Rights in UPDF, for example, and we have visited some of these training schools, and we have had sessions with the trainees. Yes, we have had some engagements with the Uganda Police, and we have had some trainings. And now, what actually we are trying to do, actually, also to have a train of trainers. For example, those who are actually mandated to do the training within police, for example, within the UPDF, within prisons, also to be abreast with this information about torture and how to pass on this this knowledge to the people that they train on a daily when it comes to issues of torture. So these are some of the things that we are trying to do to ensure that we bridge this gap of capacity in terms of knowledge and skills in applying the laws against torture, and also to start the mindset change. As I said, that we have a big problem around mindset. So if from the word go, you come from the school, when you know that actually torture is wrong, it's a crime, it's a human rights violation, it has these so many effects, and they have these alternatives, then it helps so that when someone comes from the school and comes in the community, then is able to know what to do and knows even the implications if they try to do otherwise. So those are some of the things that we are trying to do to help the communities in ensuring that they are free from torture. Of course, the other major challenge that we want also to address when we are talking about torture-free communities, of course, the question comes in to say, when someone is tortured, then what? Of course, we understand that the right, everyone has a right to rehabilitation, which is within the General Comment 3 of the UN Committee Convention Against Torture. Then we have General Comment 4 of the African Charter, which also calls on the states to provide rehabilitation services to people that have experienced torture. However, as a country, we don't have this yet streamlined. And that's why we have engagements with the Ministry of Health to see that we can streamline rehabilitation services. And when we talk about rehabilitation, is a comprehensive package, which includes access to tailored medical treatment, to tailored psychological support, to tailored social support, so that a survivor of torture can have their lives restored, for them to remain productive to the community. So we have started this engagement with the Ministry of Health, and we believe that if these rehabilitation services are actually accessible, then the communities will be able to report these issues, will be able to be documented well, and then we shall have evidence that can be presented in courts, and then cases of torture will be acted upon by the criminal justice system, and then we shall have perpetrators punished. So, and then this one goes now to ensuring that at least communities can be free from torture at that level.
Right, Mr. Ayabari, let's look at the prosecution side. When you talk about issues of capacity building, we might also be having issues there. Are you helping with the prosecution side to actually make sure that they're fine-tuned to be able to handle these cases?
Yes, thank you very much. And actually, when you talk about the Uganda police, still in most cases they go hand in hand with the state prosecutors, because they are primarily the ones handling the criminal cases. Now, in that line, we've been in the process for I think the whole of last year. We were in a process of developing the checklist, and right now it is complete. We made a checklist for effective investigation and documentation of torture cases. It was a process where we worked with the Uganda Police Criminal Investigation Department, together with the Office of the DPP, and we developed a checklist which is going to be guiding police officers as well as state prosecutors on how best they can actually investigate and document cases of torture. It in the components of that checklist, it has the what are the signs, or how do you identify a case of torture? What do you look out for in a case of torture if you're making up, maybe let's say a file for a case of torture? Then as state prosecutors, what also are you looking for on that file from the police? We had all those engagements, and they are all part of that document. Very soon we shall start circulating those that document or that checklist, which I think will make a very big impact in this process of investigating and documenting. There are still gaps, of course, when it comes to the actual prosecution process, because it is a long process which also involves a number of stakeholders from state prosecutors. We do make capacity buildings and trainings with these people, but it's also a process, as we say, and it's collective effort. We believe that with time we shall get there.
All right, and tomorrow we'll be commemorating. Last year we did commemorate, and I'm sure you did also raise your voices about these particular issues. But like we said, fighting human rights violations is always sometimes unfinished business. Do you have any particular asks this year, any particular call to action, any particular demands to the duty bearers or to any stakeholders out there that you think need to do certain things in order for us to have a torture-free society?
Yes, tomorrow we shall be joining the rest of the world, as you've put it, to commemorate the International Day in support of torture victims. Of course, this day was put by the United Nations just to remind ourselves, one, that we should come together to fight acts of torture. We should appraise ourselves where we have done well and where the gaps for us to be able to address them. But also, most important, also to stand in solidarity with so many survivors of torture across the globe, to say that don't lose hope. Even though you've gone through these acts of torture, a lot can still be done. We can still achieve a lot. So that is the whole objective of this day that we are commemorating tomorrow. And one of the things that we are calling upon, one is we are telling the Parliament of Uganda, as I talked about the whole challenge with fear, the Parliament of Uganda to enact and pass a law on witness protection. It is very important because survivors and other people that face human rights violations fear to come out, because they know once we come out, maybe we shall be, there will be reprisals, we shall be tortured again and what have you. But we are also calling upon again the Parliament also to pass the legal aid bill, because we understand that legal services are very expensive, and our communities cannot afford lawyers or legal services. And at the same time, torture renders people very vulnerable, makes them vulnerable. So they should be supported in that line. So that's what we are calling the Parliament to do. But also we are calling on the Ministry of Health also to ensure that there is a national rehabilitation policy for survivors of torture, because it's important to expand these services, to make them reachable, to make them accessible and available and adequate for people that have experienced acts of torture. Currently, we remain the only organization nationally that provides comprehensive rehabilitation services. So we are also calling on the Uganda Police really to adopt the utilization of the prevention and prohibition of torture regulations. Because currently what they are using, for example, in documentation of torture and investigation, they are still using the Police Form 3, when there is actually a whole instrument, the regulations, that provide for clear investigation processes and clear documentation processes for a case of torture to stand in court. So we are calling on police really to be able to take on this. But we are also calling on the criminal justice actors, really, police, the state prosecutors, the judiciary, to engage in training, because there is a whole bit of capacity gap in terms of the application of the law. So we are also calling on that entire chain to get ablaze with the kind of the trainings on the application of this law to ensure that there is adequate investigation, documentation, but also prosecution. Currently, we have integrated something what we call the trauma-informed approach. We realize that the criminal justice actors, they are not aware of they are not alive to the plight of survivors and the effects that they undergo, more so the psychological effects, which actually sometimes may limit survivors maybe to express themselves. Sometimes they have memory challenges because of what they have experienced. So the application of a trauma-informed perspective then helps you to have to collect proper evidence, but also to undergo that process of prosecution in the right manner. But also, so many times we have had the Uganda Human Rights Commission crying for money. And as a body that is mandated to investigate human rights violations, to have tribunals sit and listen to human rights violation, for which torture is one of them. So that means if this institution now is also limited with the finances, that means there will be a gap in accessing justice for survivors, more so as a human rights violation. So that's why we are saying, okay, let us give funds to the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Let them investigate. Let them have tribunals sit so that they can listen to cases. When you look at their report last year, they were only they investigated only a few cases of torture, and basically because of resources. For example, again in their report, they report very few prisons and detention centers visited. And it's their mandate, actually, to monitor places of detention. And we understand that so many times torture happens in these detention places, in these closed places. So if commission doesn't have the ability and the resources really to monitor these places of detention, so we increase the risk of having people tortured and having people not being able to come out, and we know what happens behind doors. So those are some of the cries, but also other major cry, and this is to all of us, the public. We need to continue calling on for accountability, and we need to continue reporting cases of torture. And of course, as the law states, anyone can report a case of torture, so long as you get to know that torture is happening somewhere. You can report a case of torture. You can report a case of torture to the Uganda police. Sometimes people have this fear and say, okay, if it's the police itself torturing, then how can I report to police? But we have also we also say, if this one police person is the one torturing you, the police is a whole big institution and has these levels. If it's someone at the police station, there is a whole division police, there is a whole regional police, there is a whole police headquarters, there is a whole police standards unit where you can report. But if that is a challenge as well, the Uganda Human Rights Commission is there to report. Let us report these cases. The courts are there because the anti-torture law opens it up that you can actually go and make a direct complaint to the court, Chief Magistrate's Court, and then they will order an investigation into that case of torture. So the law gives us that. And we also, if everything now is failing, come to civil society. For example, come to ACTV. You've been asking what we are doing to ensure that there is prosecution, cases can be documented right. That's why we opened up a legal aid clinic as an organization to support people in their process of accessing justice when they experience acts of torture.
Right, well, we have one listener called Joe who is listening in from Kamocha. He sent in his view by sending a picture where soldiers I think you can see the picture clearly. Their heads down, their feet up on the hole, and they are holding guns behind their back. And I think he's suggesting that there is torture going on. We cannot verify whether this picture came from. We have a comment from Henry who says, I'm disturbed by ACTV relying on statistics from Uganda Human Rights Commission, yet they lead in the area of torture, and yet people are not being given justice when their cases are not heard. Have you guys heard about academic torture where children are being tortured academically? No meals, no classrooms, too much homework, etc. That's his concern there. Then we have another comment from Dennis who says, torture has gone beyond physical abuse. How should the authority plan to address psychological torture, especially in the community? Like, for instance, we have police officers who stop you on the wrong point. When you maneuver to the right point, they will say you are not responding to the orders. So there's a lot of psychological torture going on, even by men and women in uniform. Then somebody else asks, that is Dennis, that's Peter asks and says, how would they describe what has been going on with the people being evicted from wetlands? Does that qualify as torture? And what advice would they give in that particular regard? Then we have a comment from James. He says, security agencies prefer to use torture because they are ill-trained to gather information professionally. Do you agree with that? He leaves with us a question there. Those are some of the questions that are coming in from the comments that are coming in from the listeners. And please, if we can respond to some of them, and I begin with you, Nancy.
Thank you very much. I think I'll start with the last one of the security agencies using torture to during the interrogations. It is true they may be using those means, but even in our capacity buildings, we still do the empowerments and teach them. And according to the law, any evidence that is collected through torture is still not admissible in court. So even when we are doing these trainings, even in police, even with their supervisors, their high people, we still inform them about this. And they are very much aware, actually. But of course, in a bunch of so many people, there will always be someone who probably still does the wrong thing and may spoil the name for the others.
Okay.
But we still try to do the education that any evidence collected using torture is not admissible in court. And even if they obtain that statement or get any kind of evidence through that manner in court, if you get to court, please raise it to the magistrate, to the judge, to whichever judicial officer is presiding
Tell
over
them
that
I was
matter.
tortured.
Yes, and that matter, according to the law, it will be stood over and they will hear the case for torture. They will investigate accordingly and they will decide on what happens. And in most cases where those cases have actually been raised and proved, the other case can actually be dismissed.
All right. Mr. Kigwe, very quickly, we have a few seconds to leave the studio. Your quick responses and closing remarks as we come to the end of this show.
Thank you so much, our listeners and those that have managed to send in comments. Thank you so much. And really, this encourages us to say, okay, let us stand together to continue fighting torture. One of the things that has come through is why should we rely on statistics from UHRC? The thing is, we have statistics. We also collect statistics from people that come to us, and we have published this in our reports as well. So psychological torture, we have our psychologists that continue addressing the issues of psychological torture. So when you come to our centers, you'll be available a psychologist to help you in that regard.
All right.
But as I say, that torture takes so many forms.
All right.
So for anything, you let us rely on the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act.
All right.
Try to find it to help you define cases of torture, whether the wetlands evictions are torture. But it is okay for you to come and consult our offices in case you need more information. Let me pass this number
very quickly
to the public so that this conversation can continue.
All right.
So our toll-free number is 0800 202791.
All right.